All right, so welcome to the third class of the American Army in Northwest Europe, the campaigns of 44 and 45. Thank you for attending and signing up for the class. A couple of admin notes before we get started. First of all, there's nobody here behind us, so we can stay like all day if we want. Rest of the day? No? Okay. But more importantly, I know Tammy passed out some critique sheets, so greatly appreciate if you'd fill those out so that she knows what you thought about the course and going forward. If there's anything else that you think we should perhaps talk about if we ever do this class or some class like this again. I think it'd be very interesting to know. All right, you should have two more maps today. One, we passed out the Western Front through January 1945, which is halfway through the Bow of the Bulge. And the other one is black and white, the crossings of the Rhine. And one source, this map for the 1945 comes from the official history of the Second World War, published by the Center of Military History. And the other one comes from the West Point Atlas of American Wars. So the cadets are using that very map as part of their military history training during their time at West Point. All right, we've got a lot to cover today. We're going to get to the Elbe River. So we're going to go, to use a movie term that I love, fast and furious. But again, as with the other two classes, if there's a question that you have or something's not clear or if you'd like me to focus on it in a different way, please let me know. We are here so that we can all share our information about the American Army in 44-45. And so our goal as we leave out of here today is to at least dipped our toe in all that water, that knowledge that I just mentioned to Jerry about all the books on D-Day. And so given that, if there's something that we want to talk about a little bit more depth or you have a question on something, please let me know. All right. D-Day to the Elbe, 11 months. That's what we're going to try to cover here today, very quickly. Slide from our last class. Remember, the concept of Operation Overlord was logistical. We're intended to establish a lodgment area on the continent of Europe from which we can then build up our forces and then after we break out of that lodgment area, drive to Germany and defeat and destroy the German army. Also from last time, the basic operational plan, and I'll reference this map up here, which we passed out in the first class, if you still have it. We're going to land 5 divisions on 5 different beaches. We're going to land 3 airborne divisions, and then we're going to establish a beachhead, land on the Continental Peninsula, and then attack and seize the harbor at Cherbourg. Because Eisenhower and General Montgomery enlarged the scope of the landings when they assumed command of this operation in December 1943, that meant that we were going to need more landing craft, which prompted a delay of the landings from May to June so they could obtain more landing craft for the operation. Both landing ship tanks, the big ones that we'll see here a little bit later, and the regular assault craft to land the troops on the beach. The basic plan again, you'll see loading up those 5 divisions in southern England, moving them as part of the naval operation across the channel, and then you can see the routes for the airborne divisions on both flanks of the operation, with the American divisions coming in from the west of the Continental Peninsula, and the British airborne coming in as landing on the eastern flank of the beachhead. We didn't talk about the airborne battle as much as we liked last time, so I'm going to reference this map right here. This is the large-scale map published in the official history. Highlights you here briefly. This is Utah Beach, this blue dot right here. Saint-Mary-Glisse, the town that the 82nd Airborne captured on D-Day, is in this blue dot. On this map of Normandy, I put this blue magnet where Saint-Mary-Glisse sits, so you have a sense of where that is in relation to the rest of the battlefields. But for the airborne operation, mentioned the Americans were going to drop 2 divisions on the early morning hours of D-Day. Their basic mission is to help secure the causeways off Utah Beach. Utah Beach here, very heavily flooded area. One of the defensive measures that the Germans took to prepare for any type of operation in a defensive area against the Americans was to flood the low-lying areas. They did that in a variety of ways. And so we knew that to get off the beaches in Utah, we were going to have to move over the causeways for the most part, particularly for our armor and our motorized forces. So the 101st Airborne had the mission to drop in this area behind the beaches, seize those causeways, seal off the southern flank of Utah Beach against any German incursion. The 82nd Airborne had the mission to drop a little bit further out here to the west, seize the crossings over the Mederet River, Saint-Mary-Glise, and then the northern and southern approaches into Utah Beach, and then link up with the airborne, the forces coming ashore on Utah Beach. Didn't necessarily go as planned. This was the first major operation for the 101st Airborne. It was the second major landing for the 82nd Airborne. But again, friction always occurs in battle. And so as those forces came in, as it came in over the Continental Peninsula, there was a lot of overcast, fog in and out. Planes got separated. Pathfinders, most of them did not drop on their intended locations to mark the drop zones. So you had a lot of troops dropped on a variety of locations here on the battlefield. The 82nd Airborne, which was the second lift coming in, ran into a lot more anti-aircraft fire because the Germans obviously had been alerted by the 101st moving and dropping in front of them, so they had an even worse drop. And so the drop over in the Saint-Mary-Glise area went fairly well, but the two regiments that were supposed to drop across the Mederet River, very widely dispersed, and really are combat ineffective in terms of the battlefield for about the first 2 days after the operation. Bottom line, however, by the end of D-Day, by the morning of D-Day, the 82nd Airborne, one regiment has secured Saint-Mary-Glise. The 101st Airborne has secured the causeways on Utah and blocked crossing sites down here on the causeways coming in from the sea. And so from that perspective, and then they later link up with the 4th Infantry Division coming ashore off of Utah Beach. But again, we end up using about 800 transports to drop the paratroopers and to move the gliders in. That's an enormous number when you think about that. Some of those transport aircraft were also towing the gliders. We brought gliders in for both divisions in the early morning hours of D-Day, just about first light, and had a mixed success with that. As you might imagine, in the hedgerows behind on the battlefield, there were a lot of gliders that ran into the hedgerows, landed on top of other gliders, were shot up as they came in, and so we take about 25% casualties in the glider forces as they come ashore that morning. They're bringing in the artillery and the follow-on forces in glider infantry. Interestingly enough, each airborne division is organized with 3 parachute infantry regiments and 1 glider infantry regiment. Parachute infantry received jump pay, $55. Glider infantrymen, regular infantrymen, did not receive any pay. They flew in on the Waco glider. You see it's the bottom plane right here from that graphic. Aluminum frame, canvas cover. Can you imagine flying over anti-aircraft fire on that baby? You're sitting back there being towed by a C-47, taking fire, bumping up and down, hoping like the Dickens that your pilot puts you down safely on the ground. Part of the problem the gliders had, in addition to what I mentioned earlier, was that the ground was obviously very wet and slick. Remember, the weather had been pretty bad for a couple days before D-Day, and so the gliders had a much longer path of landing, which also led to some problems as they collided with the hedgerows and so on. Picture here, I mentioned Saint-Mary-Glise. That's supposed to be the image of paratrooper John Steele from the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who got hung up on one of the spires of the church in Saint-Mary-Glise on D-Day. Actually, he landed on the other side, but the longest day of the movie had him on this side, and so when you stop in Saint-Mary-Glise, wonderful square, one of the best airborne museums in the world, John Steele's there to greet you every time you show up. This picture also down here below, you see a picture, that's the gear they wore. I'd highlight the item in black right in the center. That's an assault gas mask. The first waves on the landing beaches wore the assault gas mask. It's a little bit lighter, different style than the regular gas mask that the troops brought ashore. But it's designed to allow them, in case the Germans used chemical weapons on the battlefield in the initial stages of the landing. They're very concerned about that. We mentioned naval bombardment. We wanted to land at first light so that we could have a substantial naval gunfire bombardment on the beaches. This is the plan. You've got on the eastern flank, you've got Force G, J, and S, which is with the Eastern Task Force, the British Navy supporting. You've had the Western Task Force, the Americans, in support of Omaha and Utah Beach. What you see there, the channels, are the channels that the assault forces moved through. They'd all been swept by minesweepers over the course of the night, going across the channel, marked their lanes as they swept them, and then they were to assemble in these areas here, for the most part about 12 miles offshore for the Americans. The American boats are dropped, the assault craft are dropped 12 miles out for their run into the beach. A lot of waves, took about an hour to get in. I don't know about you, but I'm seasick just thinking about that. and that was the same experience that some of our soldiers had. But as far as the naval gunfire prep, started about an hour before the landings, and you can see the variety of targets there running across the course of the battlefield, all the way from the northern reaches of the Cotentin Peninsula, all the way across the Normandy beachhead area towards the harbor. And then they were offshore, of course, during the course of the battle. Yes, sir.
Do we have any idea how many Germans were waiting when we got there on D-Day?
Yes, sir. I'll talk about that in just a second. Yeah, we had essentially, in the Normandy area, there were parts of 3 different divisions. The intelligence early on was telling the Americans and the British that the Germans had, for the most part, static defensive divisions. And that were manned with at least 20% of Osttruppen, which is the German word for the soldiers that they captured in Russia. They had decided to join the German army, were from Poland and other countries in the east that had decided to join the German army. And a lot of those soldiers joined for a variety of different reasons. One, to get out of prison camps, and so on. They were not considered to be very reliable, and that, for the most part, proved to be correct on D-Day and subsequent battles in Normandy. The one surprise that we did have was in the American sector. Was the Germans had moved about a month prior the 352nd Infantry Division, which was a regular German infantry division that was considered to be, a higher quality division. Even the Germans graded their divisions in terms of what their capabilities were, for offensive all the way down to defensive purposes. The 352nd was considered to be a pretty high quality division, had 3 regiments, and they had moved into the beaches in the area around Omaha Beach, on Omaha specifically, about a month prior to D-Day. We didn't really find out about that, detect that, the Americans, until about 4 or 5 days before D-Day. And at that point, it's really too late to do anything about it. But that's really one of the causes of the fact that we had so much difficulty getting ashore in Omaha and fighting our way off of that, because of the higher quality divisions that were manning that area of Omaha Beach.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
There's some information about the quality of job that we did in the air to take out the defensive positions of the Germans, and having been there are a lot of intact bunkers and things. Is it true that we didn't do a very good job from the air to?
Absolutely correct.
Really?
And I guess I should let that slide in here, but let me just finish up with the naval gunfire piece, and we'll talk about the air. What you have is essentially a 45 to 60 minute prep, not only 7 battleships, about 20 cruisers. The British even had, over the course of the war, created monitor-like ships with massive gun turrets on them that were very low draft, that they moved across the channel to help with the bombardment area. And a number of destroyers. The intent is that the heavier guns are going to assault the larger targets, the shore batteries that we do find, and in some cases they're very effective, particularly in the area on the British beaches. But what really comes to play during D-Day, particularly at Omaha Beach, are the destroyers, who can come in very shallow, observe the fighting on the beach, and quite frankly, that helped get us off Omaha Beach, because the destroyers came in almost grounding themselves, using their 5-inch guns against targets that they had either had identified to them or saw the fight and went ahead and took on the targets. Yes, sir.
What was the name of the destroyer that saved us?
That saved us.
Yeah, that on Omaha Beach. It was.
You got me on that one. I can think of several, but I can't remember any of them right now.
Okay.
But one of the best quotes out of the naval gunfire piece is, "Thank God for the U.S. Navy," as quoted by a G3 operations officer. And to go back to that, as we talk about the fight on Omaha Beach, you really have the destroyers moving back and forth. And they would watch what was going on the ground and see where the remaining tanks were firing at bunkers, or the Germans were firing down the troops, and they would engage even without being called for fire from the troops on the ground. But there's a number of instances like that, and a couple of them scraped their bottoms as they came in because of the varying depths along Omaha Beach. All right, we'll go back to that. Back to your air piece. We have air used two different ways to prep the American landings on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. On Omaha Beach, we used strategic bombers, B-17s and B-24s, and the intent was they would fly perpendicular to the beach and drop so that, and then they were spread out over the width of the beach, so that those heavy bombs, and they tried to use 250-pound bombs for the most part, would either provide craters on the beach for protection for the soldiers, destroy the obstacles, and more importantly, destroy the German fortified bunkers. It's a total failure. And the reason it's a failure, and I've mentioned the clouds that affected the airborne operation, between the smoke of the naval bombardment and the clouds and the fog and the mist, the bombers were very worried about hitting not only the ships, but also the assault craft coming in. So they pretty much toggled 5 to 10 seconds late. So there were a lot of craters and destruction behind Omaha Beach, but not much on Omaha Beach. And one of the most noteworthy comments from many of the soldiers that landed and survived that landing was that they didn't see any evidence of the air, no craters or anything like that. They'd been told there's going to be craters there, that the Germans are going to be destroyed, and that wasn't the case at all. The heavy bombers totally missed the target and dropped late. On Utah Beach, on the other hand, we used medium bombers, B-26s for the most part, 2-engine bombers. They flew parallel to the beachhead, lower altitude, and did a pretty good job of destroying and disrupting the enemy defenses on Utah Beach, which is to our benefit, as we'll talk in just a second. We'll start with Utah Beach. I have highlighted in blue here. Sunbury Base is just behind it. Cherbourg at the top, the one port that we decided that we needed to capture to help support our logistics operations. The one major division that was there was the 91st Air Landing Division, which had done an extensive job of preparing the battlefield. Originally, the 82nd Airborne was supposed to land here at Thompson-Moore, about the middle of the continent, to help cut off the Germans. About 2 weeks before D-Day, aerial reconnaissance indicates that they have heavily fortified that area, and they've done a number of things to the potential landing zones. Put up things called Rommel's asparagus, which essentially was a pole with a mine on it, and they would put those all over the fields, and then they would wire them together. So that if you hit one, all the mines would go off. Not a great place to land if you're a paratrooper, not a great place to land if you're a glider pilot. So because of how the Germans had installed all those defenses, just 2 to 3 weeks before D-Day, the 82nd Airborne mission changes, and instead of landing out here, they ended up landing a lot closer behind the beach. The main thing about the 91st is it had 3 regiments armed with tanks. Each infantry regiment was armed with about 20 tanks. Now those tanks were the old French models that they had captured from the French army. Remember, the Germans had defeated the French in 1940 and had begun to use a lot of their equipment, particularly for the divisions in France. So they were armed with antiquated French tanks, and so we're very worried about that division being back there. And it's the one that actually fights against the 82nd and the 101st on D-Day in Saint-Mary-Glisse and areas north and south of Saint-Mary-Glisse. All right, this is a little bit exaggerated picture of Utah Beach. First of all, but it's great because it allows me to tell you a little bit about the equipment. Utah Beach was much flatter than Omaha in terms of the ground behind it. So these bunkers and so on the high ground, you're not going to see that on Utah Beach. But what I did want to show you was a little bit about the defenses. You can see pictures of the various defenses there. And the soldiers coming ashore, you see a duplex drive tank, an amphibious tank that has its shroud down. On Utah Beach, we landed amphibious tanks for the most part in the landing craft, and didn't float send as many ashore as we did on Omaha Beach. But it gives you a sense of what that looked like to the soldiers on the ground. The other thing you can take a look at is this series of tubes that soldier is carrying. If you remember the quiz we gave, the first lesson, one of the questions was, what's a Bangalore torpedo? Well, that's what it looks like before you put it together. 9 aluminum tubes, you screw together. The last part of the last tube is the warhead with TNT. You attach a detonating cord to it. You put it together, you slide it under the obstacle. But that's how you carry them ashore. And here's a little Army art of Utah Beach. You can see the ground behind it. And this is a picture from just after the war. And just behind where that African-American soldier is standing guard over Utah Beach is the area behind him is really the main landing areas. And so you can see right there's not a lot of bluffs that the soldiers, high ground that the soldiers had to deal with. There was a seawall there. And the museum today sits about right there. That 50mm gun position is still there. And in fact, that's my son-in-law and my daughter standing next to that gun when they went to Normandy with me on a USO tour in 2012. The other piece I want to mention here next to this handsome tour guide is this B-26 bomber that they have at the museum there. It was the B-26 bomber. That's the type of aircraft used to do the bombings in Utah Beach as far as the preparatory fires before the troops landed on Utah. All right, let's talk about Utah Beach. The intent on Utah Beach, and back to the main map here, here's Omaha, here's Utah on the Continental Peninsula. You're going to land the U.S. 4th Infantry Division under the command of the U.S. 7th Corps. The frontage here is a lot less than it is on Omaha Beach. And so we're going to land one regiment from the 4th Infantry Division. And I want to highlight that it's commanded by that man right there. At the time of the D-Day landings, Colonel James Van Fleet. He's class of 1915 at West Point. Who else do we know is class of 1915 at West Point? Eisenhower and the First Army Commander, General Bradley. Van Fleet is a colonel, very well respected in the Army. He had been the regimental commander of the 8th Infantry Regiment for 3 years, since 1941. It has a great reputation with the soldiers and also with his leadership. It's his regiment that lands here on Utah. Now the story on the Utah Beach landings is we do not land where we're supposed to. This is the original landing part. We end up shifting to the south. The control boats get lost. The current coming in moves the other control ships off. A lot of smoke and haze on the battlefield. And so coming in on Utah Beach, the control boats either were lost or were misoriented. And so we end up landing about 2,000 meters further south. Now, the best part of this story is the German defenses were a lot weaker there. Partly because they were less dense, but also because the air had done a good job of hitting them, and the naval gunfire prep had done a good job prior to those landings. So instead of landing into the most heavily defended place on Utah Beach, we end up landing south of that, and it goes much better for us than we had anticipated. Jim Van Fleet's on the ground. So over the course of the campaign, as his regiment, and he continued to do very well, General Bradley wants to have him promoted. He says he at least ought to be an assistant division commander, maybe down the road for us to division commander. Remember, he is the same class as Eisenhower and Bradley at West Point, right?